Well, I see you have arrived. I admire your courage. And who am I? Just think of me as your very own personal ghost host. I'm here to tuck you in tonight. So, lock your windows and doors, look in your closet and under your bed, and hold your blankets tight, and prepare for 6 terrifyingly true ghost stories. Our first story of the night involves 2 couples from India who have their holiday interrupted by a ghost. We call this one, A Girl in the Black Dress.
It was the day before Ganesh Chaturthi, and my husband and I, together with his friend and his wife, decided to take a 3-day holiday to Puducherry. We planned to leave on Friday night after finishing work, hoping to reach our destination by the early hours of Saturday. By the time we arrived at our Seaview resort, it was already 1 o'clock in the night. The resort looked charming, with its picturesque views and welcoming ambience. We chose it because we believed it would offer a positive atmosphere, free of negative energies. This was particularly important to us, as we were a newly married couple. According to our beliefs, we were more susceptible to attracting negative energies before completing our first year of marriage. As we entered the resort, we were shown to our room, number 104. The corridor was dimly lit, and the overall ambience was peaceful. However, as soon as we stepped into the room, I noticed something peculiar. The room itself felt colder than expected. Despite the sweltering heat outside, I tried to shake off the feeling of discomfort, attributing it to the fact that we were on the ground floor, but something about the cold seemed unsettling. Exhausted from our journey, we shrugged off the discomfort and quickly fell into a deep sleep. The next morning dawned bright and clear. We explored Puducherry. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we returned to the resort. Then the evening turned into a casual party with drinks and revelry, stretching into the early hours of the morning. Around 3 o'clock a.m., I was abruptly woken from a deep sleep. My heart raced as I turned to my left, only to be met by a sight that froze my blood. There, hovering above the floor, was a little girl dressed in black. Her presence was ghostly, ethereal, her feet not quite touching the ground. But the instant I caught sight of her, she turned her head to face me. A scream caught in my throat as sheer terror gripped me. Her eyes, hollow and dark, locked onto mine. A cold, penetrating fear swept through me, leaving me paralyzed in my bed. My heart pounded violently, each beat feeling like it might shatter my chest. The room grew colder, the air thick with a sinister energy. Desperate to escape the paralyzing fear, I focused on my faith. I began silently chanting the Shiva Tandav mantra and the Ganpati mantra, envisioning Lord Ganesh as a protective shield against the malevolent force. The girl vanished, leaving behind only the eerie silence of the night. My husband remained asleep, unaware of the horrific encounter. Shaken and disoriented, I struggled to make sense of what had just happened. The message I had received in the dream, "Bhumi will miss you," and the man's voice claiming that we were connected from a past life only deepened the mystery. It felt like a cryptic message from beyond, leaving me to ponder its meaning and significance. In the end, the encounter with the ghostly girl in room 104 remains an eerie chapter in our lives. Whether it was a spectral warning, a manifestation of past life connections, or simply a haunting apparition, it left an indelible mark on our souls. The darkness that had intruded upon our vacation was a stark reminder that some mysteries are beyond our understanding, and that some horrors are all too real.
Well, look on the bright side. I bet the people that own the resort didn't charge you extra for the ghost. Our next one comes from a young man that wants to take a friend to the Olive Garden. It's called, "I Just Wanted to Make a Reservation."
This story, we're getting in the Wayback Machine and traveling back to the year 2015. It was about a week before my senior prom, and I was going to make reservations at the local Olive Garden for me and my best friend. I got the normal greeting, "Thank you for calling Olive Garden at blank. How can I help you?" Now, I was 17 years old and a little nervous because I didn't even make my own doctor's appointments yet. I said, Hi, I'd like to make a dinner reservation. and I was then put on hold. I don't know how many of you have ever actually called an Olive Garden, but there's usually really tacky Italian music playing when you're on hold. Not this time. Instead of music, there was this loud whistling sound, almost like wind whistling through a window screen during a rainstorm. I tried to listen because I swore I could hear words in with the whistling, swishing sound. And boy oh boy, did I hear words. Mixed in with all of the swishing sounds, I heard a voice that sounded similar to Gollum from Lord of the Rings. I couldn't make out what was said at first, and then I blatantly heard, "You're the worst kind of cold." I remember just feeling my insides freeze, and then the wind sound stopped, and it switched to the Italian music. Within seconds, the host or whoever was going to take my reservation picked up and helped me out. With the way I dragged this out, it sounds like the whole ordeal was like 5 minutes. In reality, it was probably 1.5 to 2 minutes. Easily one of the strangest things I've ever experienced. 10 years later, I can still hear the voice in my head.
Gee, poor kid. Your only crime was calling the Olive Garden for a reservation, and you get insulted by a Gollum-sounding voice on the phone. But anyway, how was dinner? Next, we got one from a guy who saw something with his dad when he was a kid, but his dad is in total denial, we call it. My dad and I encountered a figure.
About 15 years ago, when I was 10, my family and I lived in a cozy, unassuming apartment. It was a typical summer, one filled with lazy days and quiet nights. But that peace was shattered one evening when something happened that I still can't explain. My mom and younger brother were away on vacation, leaving just my dad and me at home. One night, after finishing a shower, I stepped into the bathroom to brush my teeth. The mirror was clouded with steam, its glass foggy and opaque. Just as I began brushing, my dad joined me at the sink, his own toothbrush in hand. We both stared into the mirror, watching as the fog slowly began to lift, like a veil being drawn back. And then we saw it. In the mirror, standing behind us, was a figure, a woman, or at least something that resembled one. She was brushing her hair, her movements slow and deliberate. For what felt like an eternity, we both stood frozen, watching her in stunned silence. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished into the mist. The whole encounter lasted no more than 5 seconds, but in that moment, my heart nearly stopped. My toothbrush slipped from my hand, and I turned to my dad, wide-eyed, hoping for some sort of explanation. But he just looked at me, stone-faced, and shook his head. "I didn't see anything," he said. I was only 10, but I knew he was lying. I asked him about it repeatedly over the next few days, desperate for an answer, but each time he dismissed it. At the time, I assumed he didn't want to scare me, but deep down I knew he had seen exactly what I had. Years went by before we ever spoke about it again. It wasn't until we watched Paranormal Activity together 4 years later that I finally brought it up again, hoping for closure. And that's when he admitted it. He confessed that he had seen the woman too, clear as day. He had been just as shocked as I was, but had kept quiet to protect me. Even now, we don't know what it was we saw that night, who or what that figure was. It's a mystery that haunts us both, and we've been searching for answers ever since. So I'm hoping someone might have insight into this strange, shared experience. I've always been skeptical of paranormal stories, but this I can't explain. If anyone has a clue as to what my dad and I witnessed that night, I'm all ears.
Well, it could have been worse. Your dad could have said something like, "Nope, I didn't see anything, and I definitely didn't see the ghost of a woman in the mirror." Our next story comes from someone who is living in a haunted cottage. It's called Unwanted Guests.
Before our family friends knocked down their garage to build a cottage for my mum, sister and I to move into, their 2 kids, my age, told me about the planks of wood on the ground containing the body of a woman. Now, being 8, I was terrified but soon forgot all about it. After a year, we moved into the cottage. My sister and I shared a bedroom whilst my mum was down the hall. On my first night, I laid awake not being able to sleep, for I felt someone watching me, I turned over to look out into the hall where I saw a black image of what I think was a woman. I pulled the blankets up over my head and couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, me and our friend's youngest son decided to explore under the house. All was fine until I stumbled across something all too familiar. Planks of wood directly under where I saw that figure the night before. I remember running quickly out from under the house, stumbling over my own feet and running into my mother's room. Every night I lived in that house, I would see that very same figure staring at me. After about 3 years, things started to get really weird. One night, while my mum and sister were next door, I decided to stay home alone and watch TV. A storm started and I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, the front door, a glass ranch slider, then a flash of lightning revealed there was nobody there at all. Terrified, I ran next door. After that night, things continued to get weird, and I started to hate living there. When I was 14, my mum decided to find a house with her long-term boyfriend and I was rapt to be moving, and then things started to get really scary. After a sleepover with a couple of friends, I returned home to find my room completely trashed and things thrown everywhere. I confronted my little sister, 11 years old, thinking she had done it, but nobody had been home all day. After that night, things would move in the night and our appliances started going crazy all night. When we finally moved, I had never been happier. I now have my own room but sleep downstairs on my own, which can be scary, and if the house creaks, I still dive directly under my blankets, but so far I have not experienced any more paranormal activity. But hey, I'm only 14. Some people may choose to believe this story, others may not. But I know what I experienced and since then have been a firm believer in the supernatural world.
Wow, it sounds like the ghost just didn't like the thought of you moving, almost like she felt rejected. Our next tale is from someone that became a true believer after one night. It's called The Night I Started to Believe.
I was about 13 years old when this happened. My parents were out at a concert with some friends, and I was at home watching my little brother. The first part of the night was fine, but at about 10 o'clock I heard a high-pitched scream. I figured that it was my little brother having a bad dream, so I went up to go check on him. When I got into his room, he did not seem as if he was having a bad dream. I stayed in there for a moment to see if he would scream again. He didn't. Someone else, or something else, did. I was still in the room when another scream came from the downstairs. I freaked out. I called my parents, crying and telling them to come home. They just told me that it was all in my head and for me to go and get some sleep. I did not feel safe with my little brother being in his room all by himself, so I brought him to sleep with me. About 10 minutes after I got in bed, a door slammed. None of the windows were open, so it wasn't the wind. I decided to go look for whatever was making all of the noise. I brought my guitar with me to hit it with. Like that would help any. I saw nothing upstairs or on the main floor, but when I went into the basement there was an unfamiliar figure huddled in the corner. I did not think it saw me, but it was crying very hard. I do believe it was a child, about the age of 4. I was freaked out by what I saw. It did not look threatening. It was fairly translucent, but not all the way. I went in my room and locked the door and waited for my parents to get home. I fell asleep before I could tell them about everything. The next morning I did some research on the house we were living in, and it said there was a Jewish family that lived during the Holocaust. They all were taken to Auschwitz concentration camp, all but the youngest. They have no idea what happened to that one child, and I believe that I saw the one child that was left behind and that he came back looking for his family, and they were not there. After my experience, I will always believe in ghosts.
Well, I'd say that you found out what happened to the one boy that was left behind. Our last tale before bedtime comes from a young lady that's seen the ghost of a monk that had a bad habit. It's called the Mayor's Hall Ghost, a Jesuit monk.
This happened in 1985 in City Hall in Ponce, Casa Alcaldia. My friend and I were attending an art exhibit. I saw a monk. He had a long brown habit, a long rope like tied around its waist, and a long cross made of wood. It seemed like wood. His top head was shaved. I looked at him, from behind only. I asked my friend if she saw the monk. She said she didn't see any monk. I told her to follow me, so she can see him. She couldn't see him. I tried to see his face, but I couldn't. I tried, but he continued walking. I only got to see his ears, but not the side of his face. It was looking at the paintings. Then he started walking. I told my friend to follow me. I am following him, because I never seen these kind of father dressed in that manner. Then he turned to the left side stairs to go to the second floor. I thought the second floor must be open to the public, so I followed. When I turned to go upstairs, the gate was closed. No one was up there. It was dark. She asked me what was wrong with me. I said, "Forget it. I thought I saw a monk." Well, I did see it. 2 years later, I was called to work at City Hall's tourist department located outside the same building in the first floor. One day, our supervisor told us to do a research on some interesting points in town. I asked him about the building's history. He told me it used to be a Jesuit church, and nearby was a cemetery. I asked him if he ever heard of any strange stories about the place. He did, and he experienced one. He said he was alone one night, looking for something having to do with Ponce's carnival. He saw a tall man with a black cape and hood on, only touched his hand and it was cold. Why it did this, he does not know. Then he vanished. One day a worker and I went to the second floor above the office. I opened the lock. I put the lock in a secured place. Then we went looking for some costumes. When we were done, the lock was not there. We were frightened. After a long time, we found the lock on a seat of a chair. We went fast. I had stomach pains because of the fright. I never went up there again. Then I learned there were stories about this place where people have seen apparitions of monks, slaves, and other people. Scary.
Wow, you're right. It is a pretty haunted place indeed. Even I have been there on, business. That was some scary stuff tonight, wasn't it? But do you know what is not scary? Hitting like, subscribe, and sharing this video. It'll really help us keep the ghosts at bay. And of course, if any of you have a story to share, then by all means, drop me a line in the comments. But I do want to thank you for stopping by, and I hope the stories we told won't be giving you too many bad dreams. But if they do, then maybe you shouldn't run from them. After all, sometimes it's better to embrace your nightmares